Hi, my name is Steve Rahi. I am a Premier Field Engineer specializing in System Center Technologies. Today's discussion will be part 4 in a series we are doing for application deployment in Configuration Manager 2012. This is actually part 1 of part 4. So up until now, we have been focused on introducing application deployment in Configuration Manager, spending time working through classic package deployment. That was part 2. And then part 3, application deployment, walking through the server side in the console, how to set things up. This is part 4, where we shift over to the client experience. So taking what we learned in putting these things together and starting to see what the user might experience on the client side. We will certainly spend most of our time in the application model and look at those, but we'll also do one look at classic package deployment. So here's conditions in terms of use for the presentation, copyrights and trademark, and basically the agenda. So this is the introduction that we're talking about now. So since this is part 1, there will be a number of things that we'll do, as you see on the demo list, but we won't, there's certain other things that will be useful to look at on the client side that we will put into part 2. I will go through those near the end of this presentation, and then we'll talk about them in detail. Or I'll mention them at the end of this presentation, and then we'll go through them in detail in part 2. So basically, what I have is my server set up with a whole bunch of demos. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on the server side talking about client settings and how they impact the experience of the user on their desktop. Talking about the client environment, the pieces that the user might be working with and be interested in. Then we'll go through the series of demos in no particular order. A basic application install, uninstall. A required, mandatory, in other words, application. Look at the flow for application approval. Spend some time with required applications. That is different than the previous one listed as required. Supercedence, dependencies, user device affinity and requirements, simulated deployments. Standard package deployment, client cache, and then status for the deployment. So there's a lot to do here. And anytime we do a presentation like this, the tendency is to get tedious because there's a bit of switching back and forth to make sure the process is shown end to end, and that certainly will be the case here. So let's just dive right in and start talking through the environment. So let's just pull in the system here. And we'll start over on the CAS. That's actually my client. So let me go back to the CAS for a minute. So here's our CAS, and I want to first talk about the various client setting options that are available and applicable for software deployment. Start in the, here's the default client settings, and just start at the top. So BITS, Background Intelligent Transfer. This is not something you'll necessarily completely see today. It's actually a background test, that's the name. But you'll certainly see in this presentation the use of BITS and look at the client cache for one of the one of the demos. But this is pivotal pretty much for any kind of deployment in Configuration Manager 2012. In fact, Configuration Manager 2007 as well. There is one place where BITS is not a required piece for deployment, and that is if you have a classic package deployment and that package deployment is set to run from distribution point. That is still supported for backwards compatibility. Everywhere else, though, BITS is required. There is no other choice. For example, with the new application model, it is a download situation. So that's a good thing. You know, BITS brings a lot to the table in terms of throttling bandwidth, connectivity, and so on from the client to the distribution point. You see the throttling settings are defined here in the client settings. There's other advantages to BITS as well. One thing to point out here, whenever clients in the Config Manager 2012 world are retrieving content from the distribution point, they're not talking to the distribution point directly. They are talking to IIS using BITS, and IIS is reaching out and metering, if you will, the content down through that BITS connection from the distribution point. So a little bit of a nuance, yes, but just to be specific. Other settings here. So Computer Agent gives you the ability to set your deadlines and the experience the client will have as we get closer to a required deployment and so on. Other things here, not necessarily specific to setting or two deployments, if you will, but still important. Okay, PowerShell execution policy. Here's a new one, if you will, for the computer agent in 2012. Another thing to show real quick, if you looked at the computer agent in 2007, you would actually see that the network access account is defined on the computer agent. It's not defined there now. It's actually under software distribution settings for configure site components. So if you need a network access account configured, you need to do it here. And this is a good thing to have. So when clients go to execute software deployments, they do so under the context either of the user that's logged on, we'll talk about that in a minute, or the local system account. And that's it, right? So if you're using Configuration Manager shares, that should be sufficient as long as the account has local admin rights on the box to do the software installs. But in some cases, you'll reach across the network to a non-Configuration Manager share and need to access content during the deployment. In those cases, network access account is an important piece of the puzzle. Okay, and certainly in other places as well, such as OSD and so on, we need the network access account. So that's where you set it. So moving back to client settings for a minute, rolling on down, we have, let's see, power management is not really one that directly applies to software deployment, though it can. So here's what I mean. If you look through applications and packages and so on, you will see settings that basically say wake up the system or send wake up packets or whatever in preparation for doing this deployment. And that is specifically the wake on LAN functionality of Configuration Manager. And that's cool. If you have wake on LAN configured and you want to use that, that's what it's for. There are other places, though, that you can actually wake the system up and possibly do work that may be pending for the system. One other way you can wake a system up is through AMT, vPro technology integration, if you will. And then here's another one, power management. So power management does a lot more. It manages power settings, a lot more than just waking systems up. But it is possible to set a wake-up timer that will bring the system back awake at a certain time, be able to do any work that's pending, and then the system will eventually go back to sleep, depending on the settings. So that kind of has a tie-in, so I thought I would mention it. Software deployment, this definitely is one we'll see a demo of. So I've mentioned that one of the settings that you'll see on deployments is either available or required, or to parallel that to Configuration Manager 2007 terminology, optional or mandatory, meaning that the deployment either is a choice by the user or it's required. It's going to be installed on the schedule you specify. So if you slate a deployment to be required, then what that flags Configuration Manager 2012 to do, and it's new in 2012, is to evaluate every so often, by default once a week. So I've changed mine to every 5 minutes just as a demo here. Okay, but by default once a week, every application will get reevaluated to see if it's still there, and if it's required but it's not still there, we'll get redeployed. Okay, flag for redeploy. And so that's again very different in Configuration Manager 2012. This kind of starts to illustrate the reason why it's important to fill out all of the detail about your applications correctly, such as the ability to detect whether an application is present or not. Okay, if we have incorrect detection logic for the application, then we're going to think that it's gone, and we're going to roll the deployment again. Okay, that's also actually pivotal, and you'll see maybe me say this a couple of times. That's also kind of pivotal for the overall success metric for deployment. For example, you can, in fact, I did early on while I was testing things, configure the detection logic, and I'll show you that in a minute. The detection logic, so that it was, just something that was acceptable to the wizard. I could pass right on by it, but it was bogus, right? So I deployed an application. I would see that it deployed, no problem, but then it would roll over and say failed. And I kind of scratched my head as to why, and I should have realized what was going on, and that is after we do a deployment, we're going to go back and look and verify that the deployment is actually there according to the installation rules that you specify. This is very much like the same behavior with a software update. When we deploy a software update, then there are rules that say whether that update successfully installed or did not. We'll go evaluate those, basically rescan and tell you installed, success, failure, whatever. Same kind of deal. We'll go use the installation rules and validate that the deployment actually took place. Okay, so if they're incorrectly configured, then you will see failures whenever in reality the deployment may have happened correctly. So very important to make sure those kinds of details are filled out on the application. And then last thing, user and device affinity. So this is the process that we go through, basically threshold information that we can configure here and so on to flag how Configuration Manager 2012 learns what the mapping should be between a user and a primary device. This is one way. Okay, there's several other ways, and I'll show them to you as we go along. Right, to allow association of one user to one primary device, as the term is, or one user to multiple primary devices, or one primary device to multiple primary users, okay, if you will. So this is where you can configure and enable, if you will, the use of user device affinity for devices. Okay. All right, so that said, I want to show you one more thing. Get rid of that. If I could just activate the server, that wouldn't show up. Show you one more thing that I want to call out here. So in the software library, I'll just pick one of my apps. It doesn't really matter which one. I'll just pick this one. Okay. Actually, it's on the deployment type, so let me hit that. 1 second. All right, there it is. So I just want to specify this because it could be a little bit confusing, and I want to make sure it's clear. So this installation behavior, either install for user, install for system, or if the target of the deployment is a device, install for system. But if the target of the deployment is a user, install for user. Okay, third option that we didn't have before Configuration Manager 2012. And these options were in previous versions of Configuration Manager, but renamed. Okay, kind of. So if you the reason why I want to be clear about this, when you target your deployment, you're going to target it to a collection of either users or user groups, or a collection of devices, typically computer systems. That target is going to apply based on how you pick the collection and so on. That's where the application is going to be delivered. But you can specify when it comes time to run the deployment how you want to run it. Either run it in the system context, which would be install for system. Okay, that would be basically the equivalent of an administrative install because we're going to use the local system account. Or you can plan to use install for user, which runs the deployment in the context of the user account, which works fine provided the user has appropriate credentials. So just to specify what those are, okay, these don't necessarily work in tandem with the collection that's targeting. Sometimes because of the terminology that may trigger in the mind that they're somehow linked, that they're not. It's either installing using the user context, installing using the system context. All right, and what you'll see in the demos is that a lot of the demos are in the user context. They're basic batch files and things just to show what I'm trying to show. But since they're batch files, since my user's an admin, whatever, even if they weren't batch files, it would work. But in a lot of production environments, users are not administrators, are on their own system, so a lot of times the deployments won't work in the user context. All right, so that said, let's shift over to the client side and tour around there for a minute. So there's 3 primary places that the user might be interested in looking on their client. The first is in the control panel. It's the Configuration Manager applet. All right, so if we look at that, we see some interesting information here. On the General tab, we see detail about the system. We see which site code the client's assigned to, which management point is assigned to the client. This comes from its primary site. All right. Now, if I am, in my case, this client's in the boundaries of the primary site, so no problem. This is what we see. As we'll talk about in Part 2, there are some roaming scenarios, if you will. So that's a quick tease for Part 2 of this. Where we may have a client that's assigned to its primary site, but actually either outside boundaries of the hierarchy in total, or in the boundaries of another primary or secondary site, whatever, and you'll actually see the information here in this window reflect that location and the different management points and all that may be in use and accessible to the client, so on. So for now, this is just a good summary information. Components that are in place, and then various actions that can be taken on the client. So all of these are the same that were in place in Configuration Manager 2007, with the exception of this one. So this one action basically ties to the client setting for reevaluating software deployments that I showed you a second ago in the console. So we can either wait the 5 minutes when we get to the demo, depending on where we are in the 5-minute cycle. Maybe we will wait for the 5-minute. We don't know where we are in the 5-minute cycle, but if the 5-minute cycle kicks in during the demo, we'll use it. Otherwise, we'll kick it using this action. All right, and again, that will make more sense whenever we get to the demo. But the actions are the actions, and so on. So users might want to go ahead and initiate an evaluation of applications that should be required, maybe that were taken away, whatever. Maybe administrators will, help desk, to get things back in order, whatever. But that's what this does. Other actions, so if a deployment's being sent down and you want to speed things along, then you can certainly kick a machine policy cycle. Again, this is really no different than it was in previous versions, and so on. User policy, again, is just a way to expedite things moving through. User policy, a lot of times, wasn't even paid attention to in previous versions because we targeted to systems typically. But now, with the new user-centric focus, being able to deploy to user group collections, certainly this may be something you want to use. Also, by the way, in order to deploy to users, you have to enable that in the console. Let me show you that real quick. So shifting back over to my CAS, if I go into client settings, I kind of passed this over a second ago. If I go into client settings, administration again, there we go, client settings, pull that up, and look at the client policy. Then this one right here, enable user policy polling on clients. If that's not set to true, then you can't check for user policy. So again, that's something new in 2012, so be aware of that. All right. So also on the client, things another place that's interesting. Well, the rest of these, real quick, on the applet here are pretty non-software distribution deployment specific, except for the cache. So the client cache is by default configured at 5 gig. Okay, this is where it's located. I'll show you some more about the cache in a minute. Remember, though, about the cache, we will fill the cache kind of in a first in, first out style basis. If content isn't yet deployed, we'll flag it to try to keep it in the cache and whatever. Ultimately, if you want to keep something in the cache continually, you can set the persisting cache flag on the deployment. But there are cases where we'll need to make room in the cache once we fill it with 5 gig. If something new is coming down that we don't have enough space for, then we'll need to fill that up. Clean the cache out from stuff that may have already run successfully, bring down the new stuff so it can execute, and so on. I'll kind of show you that in action as we get into the demo. All right, but this is where you set the cache size, and there's other ways to set it too, but by default it's 5 gigs, and this is where it is, right here. All right, so other items on the client that the user would interact with, so certainly Software Center. So I've already got it popped up here, but if you want to load Software Center, it's available from all programs, ConfigMan 2012, and then Configuration Manager Software Center. Okay, so I have it launched. I won't go ahead and launch it. If we go into Software Center, then we'll see the different deployments that are available to us, both optional and mandatory. This one actually is a required application. You see it's in Software Center right along all the rest of them, okay, and the different statuses that are available and so on. This is where we can see all of the software that's actually installed, and this is where we can interact for other things as well. So, for example, this top one allows the user to specify work information. So think of this, and we haven't talked about this much yet in this series. I think I might have mentioned it once, but the idea of maintenance windows. Again, a tease for part 2 of this. We will talk about maintenance windows in part 2. How those work on the server side. This is essentially the client version of a maintenance window. Okay, now, as an administrator, you can affect changes in all of these, but you, as a user, can specify when you want to have your work hours acknowledged and basically try not to do any scheduling during work hours and do it outside of your work hours so you're not disturbed. Okay? Other things, power management, whether you want to adhere to the corporate IT requirements for power management, computer maintenance, when we're able to actually apply software changes to your system, okay? And then remote control settings right here. Okay? So all of these allow the user to have control over their system, and of course the administrator can ultimately make the final decision as to how things work. All right, so that's Software Center. We'll certainly spend a lot of time in Software Center today to kick off our various demos and so on. Another interface that users will spend time in is the software catalog. So this is our software catalog for specifically deployments that are targeted to users, user groups, things that users would want to maybe service themselves, request on their own. That's what it's for. And we'll do a couple of things in here as well. Okay, so in here we have the ability to view applications that are available. When we do our demo for application approval, we'll see the application request section, and then when we talk about user device affinity, we'll talk about this section then. Okay, so we'll leave that for now. Okay, so let's move straight into our first demo. So we have a few to do, and again, some of these are kind of basic. They're not real exciting to watch, but the point is to try to show you how things operate from a user's perspective and kind of what the experience might be for them. There's so many choices and options as to how to set things up. There's really no way to cover every possibility, so I'll do several, again, to try to give a feel for how things work and go from there. So this is the first one. This is just to demonstrate a simple install, simple uninstall. Nothing fancy here. This is an MSI-based deployment. So if we look at properties, we will see, for example, that we don't have any references, nothing here tying to this deployment really at all. Well, I lied. Actually, there's a supercedence relationship I put in. I forgot about that. But no big deal for our simple deployment. We're just deploying rich copy in this case, so that supercedence relationship doesn't yet really even come into effect. Okay, content location, it's on our distribution point. This doesn't have any supercedence relationships defined with any other application. We do have our deployment type here, so if we edit that, we'll see here's where our content's located. Here's our program, MSI, install, uninstall, also MSI-based detection method. Again, nothing fancy here. We don't have any requirements set. We haven't changed any return codes, nothing like that. So we have the application, we have the deployment type, and then we have two deployments. One for all systems, this is the one we'll actually run, and one for all users. Okay, so all systems enables this to show up in Software Center. All users enables this to show up in the software catalog. So let's go over to the client and run this and see what it looks like. So if we go over to the client and we minimize this, go over to Software Center, then I will go grab this. This is my first demo. So I see the different information about this deployment. Again, I haven't filled out everything, but the user at least can see how large it's going to be. If restarts are going to be required, what the description is, and so on. So I'll go ahead and kick this off and pay attention right here to the status. Okay, so waiting to apply, and we'll just see installing. Again, in this case, the content's already in the cache. I've already run this in the past. So it says downloading, installing software, but that should have already been in the cache, so this should roll on through without having to download anything extra. So when it downloads, you'll see in a minute download in the status. You'll see that coming up for a few of the demos. All right, so this is rolling on through. Take a minute for this to install, and then we'll be done. Okay, so we'll just let this spin for a second. Okay, and as quick as that, we are now installed. We see the pop-up show up, installation complete, and so we're good to go. If we look over in the control panel and look in programs and features, we will find that it is, as soon as I can find programs and features, there it is, we will see that rich copy is now installed. Okay? Here in just a second. There it is, rich copy 4.0. So nothing stellar here. We just installed an MSI, big deal, but just to show you the experience whenever we do it. Okay, so now I'm going to uninstall it. So I could certainly go through and uninstall it through programs and features, but I can just as easily, since I have an uninstall routine defined, uninstall it from here. So we'll go through the uninstall, and then we should see that it disappears from programs and features. So we're removing software, and then in just a minute we will go on into the control panel again and get it away. So now it says available, removal complete. So let's go to programs and features again and look, and now we don't see rich copy. Okay, so worked kind of as you expect, right? So since we targeted to systems, that's why it's here, right? This is in Software Center by targeting the systems. We also have a deployment to users, which is why we see it over here as well in the application web catalog. So if I installed it here, it would be the same kind of experience as what you just saw. So instead of belaboring the point, I won't do it from the application web catalog. I'll actually install this one from the application web catalog so you can see that. All right, so good enough. That's demo number one. So moving on, let's look at a required application. So this is in ConfigMgr 2007 and before terminology, a mandatory application. So I configured this application, where is it? Required mandatory app to be one that has to roll down to the system. Now, if I would have configured a deployment for it right then I would already have it installed. But I don't have it installed because I don't have a deployment. So I'm going to go ahead and configure my deployment real quick, just to show the experience again of applications rolling through without the user having to touch the system at all. So here I'm just going to go assign to all systems. And I've already got the content deployed to distribution points. So here I'm going to say this is required. All right. And I'm going to do this as soon as possible and let it roll on through. And so now the deployment should be created and start to roll through the environment and become active. So this will have to replicate down to the primary site from the CAS. So it should happen pretty quickly. Let me go back to the client. And I'm going to go ahead and kick a policy cycle so I can expedite the process a bit. So go back into Control Panel, Configuration Manager, and start a policy cycle for machines since I targeted the All Systems collection. Run that now. All right. And I'm just going to sit here for a minute and refresh this. Hopefully we'll see it pop in just a minute. You see it's not on the list right now. Okay, so thought it popped in. Didn't quite pop in yet, doesn't look like. Okay, that's not it, by the way. This is for another demo coming up. So we'll just sit here for a minute and see if it shows up. I'll probably get impatient. Let me go ahead and pop another policy cycle just to make sure. And refresh again. When this happens, it will happen very quickly. It's seeming to take a little bit, so this should actually work its way through. We'll definitely be spending a decent amount of time here. And again, this should require no action on my part, so I will come and refresh this occasionally, and we'll move on to other demos instead of just watching the screen circle around. All right, so we'll definitely come back to that, though. So the next one that I want to do is the application approval. So here I have a bogus app on my CAS. This isn't really an application at all. It's basically a zero-length executable. But what I've done is, in the scenario, kind of envision, okay, maybe we have a computer-aided drafting, CAD, application. Typically, these applications are fairly expensive. Maybe not all users need them, but we want to make them available to the users that do. But since it's expensive, we don't want just any user to be able to install it. Instead, we want to see who's asking for it and be able to approve or deny that request. So everything's pretty normal about this deployment. The only thing that this does is, in the deployment here, let me just show you what actually takes place. In this deployment, all we do is run, well, if I can get the deployment to stay up, all we do is run a simple program that really doesn't exist. So this will fail. It's a zero-length executable file just so I could show you the approval workflow, right? But for my deployment, the way I flagged that I wanted this to participate in the approval workflow is I target it first to a user. If I didn't target it to a user, I wouldn't see this option. Then, since I targeted it to a user, I have this box that shows up, require administrator approval if it's requested. Okay, so with those, with that in place on the client, I can go to the application web catalog. Oops, helps if I actually pick the right VM. All right, and let's just refresh this here, see if it ever rolled down. Nope, not there yet. Doesn't look like, so we'll keep checking. Application web catalog, and I saw that I have this computer-aided drafting approval demo, and it shows, interesting, shows no, not required. And by the way, I just wanted to show you here, installation completed, it just showed up. Okay, here's our required mandatory app, didn't do a thing, and it's now installed. Okay, so there you go. All right, finish that one out. Now, let's go back to the computer-aided drafting demo, or approval demo. So I actually noticed that I had left this, or it said required approval equals no. I had already worked through this and had forgotten to reset it, so I had to quickly pause the video and go back and reset it. So here's the CAD approval demo with the right status of requires approval equals yes. So the user is not able to install this directly. They have to make a request. So pretty simple workflow. Just type in what the reason is for your request here, and then we'll be able to submit it. So want cool drawing tool. Okay, so I'll click submit. Now, what this does is the request is submitted. It goes into the My Application Requests queue and waits for approval. So let's look at that queue for a minute. So here's the status as soon as it updates, requested. So until the administrator on the server side takes action to approve or deny that request, the user has to wait. Okay, so here's the approval request. It probably isn't here yet. No, in fact, it'll take a few minutes. Okay, so I'll pause for a couple of minutes, and now here it is. So here's the approval request coming in. It shows under status requested. So if I go to properties on the request, I can see the ask here, want cool drawing tool. If I go to approve, okay, as I will here, I can just right click approve. It doesn't approve it right away. It lets me send a response back. So I'll just put in, okay, good use of money, whatever. Hit OK. So now it's approved, and off it goes. So now it's making its way back down to the client. And we'll wait and see if it actually gets down here. It'll take a couple minutes again and gets approved. All right, so while I'm talking about that, so end to end, this is a pretty simple approval mechanism. The user asks for it, the administrator gets the request and has to approve it, and then the user will be notified in here that their application request was successful, or they can just look in the application catalog and see that their software now is no longer requiring approval, and the installation can start. Some folks have asked for the ability to have a more robust workflow for approvals, and this is what we have out of the box. That's really it with ConfigMgr 2012. But there has been already a decent amount of talk of possibly building some additional approval workflows with something like System Center Orchestrator. Haven't dug into that. Don't know what's maybe possible with that exactly, but at least it's an option if to investigate if more robust workflows are of interest. But this is what we have out of the box. So let me refresh this again and see if we have any change here yet. If not, then we'll pause the video and wait until the status actually comes down. Nope, there it is. Status approved. Good. So application catalog again. Now the requires approval should say no, like it did whenever we first started this, and I had to reset things. I can click install, and very similar to what we see in the application or the software catalog, we're going to connect to the server. We're going to validate requirements and so on. Now, again, this will fail ultimately. It may show OK here, but you should see a pop-up at the back indicating failure, because it really isn't a valid application at all. So it worked its way through, and you'll probably see a little bit of activity going on here in a minute with some pop-ups or whatever. But it ultimately will fail because it's an invalid executable. It's just a zero-linked file. But anyway, so that gives you a flavor for how the approval mechanism works in 2012. So let's move on to our next demo. So this one is required applications. So you may be saying, and you would be correct, hey, you've already showed me a required application installing, and that's true, right? But what I'm specifically wanting to show you with this one is an application that has been slated as required and has already been deployed in the past. So when we started the demo, it's already been deployed. So that's this application, test app required. So I've deployed that to the agent. It's actually installed on the agent, and it's slated as being required in the deployment. So if I go over to the client and look, let me go away from here, back, there we go. So there's the failure that I told you was coming. Okay. So look in the Software Center. Here is my test app required. So if I were to look at the rules for this, or for the installation rules, basically what this is looking for is to validate that testapp.exe is in place in the root of the C drive. And here it is. So if I take this away, which I just did, I am somewhere in the middle of my 5-minute cycle where I'm reevaluating these apps to verify any required apps are present. So I may, in just a second, see activity start to reinstall that app because I just removed it. I'll work my way to the control panel and initiate this manually just for sake of time, which will have the same effect. So let me go to Actions, do an application deployment evaluation cycle, run that now, and we should start to see some activity. Again, notice here, as we watch for the activity to begin, I'll pull this down, okay, and then we'll check in a minute, and we should see test app is back at the end of the day. Okay, so we'll just pause and watch for activity to begin. It shouldn't take long. There it goes. All right. So past due, it's going to be installed. So the software changes are coming down, and the app is installing. You saw the flash of the command prompt as the batch file ran to recopy the information out, and there's test app back in place. Okay. So quick and silly demo just to show you the requirement evaluation cycle and what it does. Okay, so installation now complete and good to go. Okay, so let's move on to our next demo. So here's where things start to get a little bit fun, more interesting to me anyway, is this demo kind of shows the supercedence relationships that can be put in place. So for this one, the scenario is that I have deployed rich copy. And maybe I've deployed it to all systems in my environment, maybe just a few, but whatever the case may be, if rich copy is in place on a system, I need to detect that and replace it with robocopy. Okay? So robocopy is going to be replaced with this application. So robocopy from rich copy. So if I have rich copy, I'm going to robocopy. If I don't have rich copy, robocopy is still going out. Okay? So let's look at the properties of our application here as soon as the properties window comes up. Come on. There we go. Well, let me minimize the screen. There we go. Okay. So here we have supercedence defined. And basically I've already got the relationship that says the application rich copy and deployment type rich copy 4.0 full is going to be replaced with robocopy. And I do want to uninstall rich copy if I find it. Okay. So let me actually show you how you would build one of these. So if you click add, I can't pick rich copy again because I've already picked it. But for example, I have my current application, robocopy. Robocopy from rich copy is the application name. I can choose which application it's going to supersede. So I can pick any one of these and hit OK. And it's going to bring me into a window here that says here's the old deployment type. Wimgappy is the old deployment type that I'm going to replace with robocopy from rich copy. It's an MSI, and I either do not want to replace it or I want to replace it with the new deployment type. So if I'm going to replace it, I can choose to either uninstall it or not. All right, so let's look at this for a sec. So notice in my new deployment type, I have a choice either do not replace or replace it with a given deployment type. I see one deployment type here because I have one deployment type defined. Also, my old deployment type here is the one that I have defined already. So again, this application only has one deployment type. Okay, so I can choose however makes sense based on the different applications that are at play and deployment types, whatever. Okay, I can also choose to uninstall or not. If I do not choose to uninstall, but the application's there, then I'll do an upgrade of the application. If I choose to uninstall, then I will uninstall the application first and replace it with the new deployment. Okay, all right. This also underscores again why it's critical that your detection logic for your deployments be correct. It also illustrates why it's important that you have your install as well as your uninstall routine defined for an application. So if we do need to uninstall it in a supercedence type relationship or whatever, we know how to do that. Okay. All right. So I've already got this one defined right here. Okay. And so I'm going to uninstall the app if it's there. So the first thing I'm going to do in the demo is put rich copy back. All right. And then also, I don't have anything else exciting here except for that. So then also I can view these supercedence relationships with view relationship supercedence and be able to tell how these two work in relationship to one another. All right. It continues popping up behind the console. Sorry. So here's robocopy from rich copy, robocopy, blah, 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 and we replace rich copy. Okay. So there's the relationship. So let's go run this on the client and see what happens. So again, first thing I'm going to do is install rich copy again. So here's rich copy. It's available right now. Let me go ahead and install it. And then once I do, we'll notice a couple of changes here in the console. Okay. So it's installing. And you can already see how the console will flex as different deployments have been attempted and different things. Okay, you can see that it failed, so it's going to be retried because we went ahead and did it. This is, again, Software Center. This is not the application web catalog. All right, so installing. And we'll wait for it. Shouldn't take too long. Okay, so it's installed. All right, good to go. Now, notice how some of these things. Let me refresh the console for a minute. All right. So now robocopy from rich copy. This actually should say, and it should in a minute, flip over to say when rich copy will be replaced. So one of the things that I configured, let me show this to you on the app, and maybe it will be changed when we get back. One of the things that we can configure whenever we're doing a supercedence relationship, and this might catch you off guard at first, but let's look at the deployment. So this is to all systems, okay? And notice that this is deployment settings will be available, and it's supercedence. Let's see, scheduling. Yeah, here we go. installation deadline to upgrade users with superseded application. Since we have a supersedence relationship in place, we have this option in the deployment, right? So I configured that no later than 12/1/2012, I want to schedule the installation to take place. Okay, so we should see that reflected in the console that the rich copy application will be replaced no later than this time frame. All right, so that may not flex yet, but it should eventually show up. That's what I was waiting on. It may or may not be there, but we'll run this nonetheless. Okay. All right, so this is available. Let's go ahead and run, and let's watch what happens. Okay, again, rich copy's there. Go ahead and install. Okay, so waiting for applying changes, and we'll let it work itself through. So basically what happens during the deployment, again, this is a batch file. All it does is it copies robocopy to the root of the C drive. Okay, so robocopy is not there right now. No longer available. Look at that. So since we're running through the supersedence, we're replacing rich copy. So we flag that no longer available because we're moving it away. So we're uninstalling rich copy, and then we're going to replace it with robocopy that just installed because you saw the flash. Here's robocopy.exe, and now we should be about finished up. And there we go. Okay, so that's the supersedence relationship, installation complete, and easy as that. Okay, so let's move on. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and remove robocopy here because I need to do that, and we'll go from there. All right, so let's move on to the next one, which is to talk about dependencies. So let's switch back to the CAS here and go through that demo for a second. So for the dependencies, we have 3 applications. This is the main one that is going to be deployed. So you'll see that I have the application and I have one deployment. This application depends on these 2. In fact, if we look at the map for the application, I'll show you the construction in just a minute. Under relationships to view our dependencies, we'll see that the main app depends on app number 1, and then app number 1 depends on app number 2. All right, so a nested dependency here that we have. Just one dependency between the apps. You could define more than one dependency within an app if you wanted to at just one level, but we can also nest a couple of layers deep. So the other thing to notice, again, one deployment, 0 deployments for these others. Okay, so that will illustrate the point that even without a deployment, we are able to deploy dependencies if they're needed. All right, also another kind of another tangent to go on for this. So let me show you the app first. So here's our dependency, and here's our deployment type. So let's look at that. So our dependency says I need dependency 1 to be present for this app to install, and it's going to automatically install if it's not there. Okay, and then on dependency 1, I have a dependency on dependency 2 in the same way that dependency 2 has to be there before dependency 1 can install. So there this is. Dependency 1 depends on dependency 2 and will auto install. So that's the scenario. So let's talk about it. This is really cool to be able to take dependencies take applications and link them together in a dependency relationship. So if you're missing an application, you can install it at that time and not have to fail the application. We can just take care of it. All right. So really powerful stuff there. And when folks see this, sometimes a question that comes to mind, maybe they have been used to Configuration Manager 2007, where we didn't really have a robust engine like this, and so they started making use of task sequences to do this kind of thing, so that you can exactly specify the order of install for applications and make sure that needed applications are there, and all of that logic that you can put inside of a task sequence. And the question comes up, does this replace the task sequence? Is it unnecessary now to use a task sequence? And the answer is, yeah, it can replace the task sequence to some degree, but the real answer depends on what you're needing to do. So specifically, If you still need to guarantee the order of installation for dependencies, then a task sequence still may very well be what you need. All right. The other thing, if you need to tolerate reboots in between, then a task sequence may very well be what you need to look at. All right. So, but either way, between a task sequence or the dependency model that we have with our applications, virtually any installation scenario can be covered. So let's see how this looks when it runs on our client. Okay, so I do not have dependency main installed. Now, what dependency main is very, very simple. This is a series of batch files. So the dependency main is a batch file that will copy in a flag file to the root of the C drive to satisfy the installation criteria. We don't have them here, so good, I cleaned that up. So dependency main will copy a batch file in, and that's its total job. Dependency 1 will also copy its own batch file in. Dependency 2 will copy a third batch file in. So in this case, none of the three are in the root of the C drive. So the deployment of dependency main is going to have to handle installing all three pieces. So let's go run this, and we'll see. So watch up here, and then also watch down here as the pieces start to roll in. So we're waiting for changes, and we should start to deploy. So you see the screens flashing, you see the dependencies roll in. There's dependency 1, dependency 2, and then main deploy. And as easy as that, we're done, right? So the dependency chain detected that neither dependency 1 nor dependency 2 are there by simply calling main deploy. We figured all that out. These were required, set to automatically install, and they did. Okay. So the next question that might come up is, what happens if you uninstall? Now that we have all three there, what happens? So let's see. Uninstalling, so let's see what happens here. So now the uninstall happens. The only thing that happened is that the main deploy removed itself. So to get a little bit more detailed in that, when we're going forward in our deployment, doing the installation, then we'll resolve all the dependencies that need to be there, and if they're not, we'll put them there. But when we're doing an uninstall, then we don't know if those dependencies are needed by something else or not. So we leave those there and just uninstall the top level app. All right. Cool. So that's that one. Let's turn the page and talk about our next demo, user affinity. So let's go back to our CAS for a minute. User device affinity and our requirements engine. So we'll use this one demo to cover both of those. Talk about user affinity as well as requirements. So here's our demo for this. All right, and a couple of things first on user affinity. Okay, so the idea of user affinity is defining again which primary devices are associated with which users. Okay, or said another way, if when we're doing a deployment we are deploying to a user's primary device or not. Okay, that engine where we can figure that out relies on user device affinity, device to user mapping, that kind of relationship, so that we know when we're targeting a primary device or we're not. So there's a couple of ways that we can do that. I already showed you the client settings where we have user device affinity enabled. Okay, and we can make some adjustments. There's a couple of other places that we can do it, and the first is on a system itself. Well, there's a couple, even in the console here. Okay, so if we go to an individual system, this is my client machine that I'm using for testing, and look at the menu, we have an option to edit primary users. So right here we can see all of the users that are around in the environment here, and can map them to this device as a primary user if we want to. So even if the system doesn't automatically detect this is a primary device for a given user, we can force that by editing a given device. Okay, so that's one way. Another thing we can do is import user device affinity if we want to do that. If we have a file and there's a mapping basically a CSV file where we have domain username to the device's NetBIOS name. We want to import that, so we do it externally. Want to bring it in? We can do that too. Okay. And then thirdly, we can allow the user to map out their primary devices themselves. So to do that, we have to go back to the client and look at the application web catalog. And here we have the ability to let a user specify which devices they own. So notice this option: I regularly use this computer to do my work. Right? What that means is that the user, by selecting this checkbox, will be able to say this user is my primary computer. Right now, the user or the computer is not my primary computer. Okay, so I did that so I would intentionally see my user device affinity test fail. Okay, so let's pull it together and show you what I mean. So for this demo, oops, I minimized it too much. So for this particular demo, I created an app back here on the CAS. Get back to software library. And for this app, I specified specifically a requirement that in order for the app to run, I had to be logged on as a primary user on the machine. Okay, so I do that with my requirements engine. So the requirement is primary device equals true. So if I'm logged on to a primary device, then this should be able to run. If I'm not logged on to the primary device, then it should not be able to run. Okay? And in fact, you'll see whenever I try to run this in the application catalog, since I'm not on a primary device, this will fail. Okay? So let's go back to the client and go to the user catalog and try to run our user device affinity test. All right, so we'll run that. And we'll go through and make a connection to the server, evaluate our rules, and right after we evaluate our rules, we should see that the application fails to install. There we go, evaluating requirements. And right away, we fail. Application install not started because it doesn't say exactly why, but it gives a few hints as to what might be going on. So this fails on purpose because I don't have this set as my primary device. Okay? All right, good enough. And that's driven by a combination of setting primary device in ConfigMgr, either automatically letting it detect it, or as I did, physically stripping out my account from being the primary device or being associated with this system as a primary device, and then using the rules engine. Okay, so next in line is another little sample I want to show you here, where we have the ability in ConfigMgr to simulate a deployment. And this is going to be very important, especially as you're getting accustomed to this engine. Okay, so this is a simulated deployment. For this, I built a deployment. I built a deployment type. Okay, but I did not. I'm sorry, I said that wrong. I'll get these terms switched up, so bear with me. For this example, I built an application, I built a deployment type, but I did not build any deployments. But yet you see a deployment here. Okay? So what I did is I built this and I said I want to test this. I want to see if this will work in my environment and what the results will be. So to do it, I simulated my deployment. When I simulate the deployment, I have to specify a collection and what my action is going to be, either install or uninstall. Click next to the wizard, and now the test is underway. The way the test begins is a deployment is created by the system. Notice that this is a simulate deployment. I can't go to properties on this. I can't do anything with it. I can certainly delete it if I want to, but I don't want to, so I'll say no. All right, and what it'll do is just go out there and run through the rules, run through the engine, see if things are going to work, if they're not. So let me show you what I have configured here. So basically, I've used the rules engine again to specify that this deployment can only run, and it's hard to see it right here, so let me edit it, when the operating system is one of these versions. All Windows 2008 systems can run this. and all Windows XP systems can run this. Notice Windows 7 systems cannot run this, and that's my test client. All right. So I've deployed this to the All Systems collection, and I want to go see what the results are. So let me take us over to the monitoring pane, and we'll look at the results. So I've already got the results up here, and I can just click on the results, see that I'm 100% compliant. Okay, but notice 100% compliant does not mean that 100% of the systems are able to receive this deployment. What that means is 100% of the systems have reported back. Okay, so if I look at the detail, I've got 4 successes, meaning 4 systems reported back, 1 that did not meet requirements. So I would expect if I deployed this application that I would have at least 1 system that failed the deployment, and that's expected based on my simulated results. All right, and just right here, I can glance and see, okay, at least this 1 system we know failed to meet one of the requirements set in the deployment type. So if I have a question about what that is, I can go find out and see. But if I go to look at the details, okay, view status, then I can see right away on the requirements not met tab, it's refreshing, what this is. So here's my 1 system, or here's my 1 requirement, okay, and here's the system that did not meet it. And that absolutely makes sense. This is a Windows 7 box, so all this makes perfect sense. If I go to success, then I can see the same kind of detail, retrieving status, okay, and we know that this server is already compliant, meaning it has it, okay, and then the simulate success. Now these systems should be successfully able to run this. All right, and you can look here in the status for all your different deployments, see all of these kind of things, whether they're simulated or real. Okay, I can look through, and all the rest of these won't be all that exciting because it's just 1 real system that's going to report back here. I didn't simulate anything, but still, you get the idea. The deployment status information is really, really helpful to be able to help you see into the environment and what exactly is going on. Also, the reporting engine, I won't go into the reporting engine right now, but there's a number of reports that will help you see the same kind of information, track your deployments, and get good information back. All right. Also, I can't talk about status without mentioning the alert engine. You can configure alerting. I haven't done anything like that on my deployments or my applications, but you certainly can. And if your deployments don't reach a certain threshold or whatever else, then you can certainly see alerts pop in to tell you that as well. So all of that together and more, frankly, can help you with status. Not to mention, also even the log files. If you're trying to troubleshoot, all this is well and good and very useful information, but the log files will be your best source for what the problem is, and we'll peel back the covers on the log files in a future session. All right. So with that said, we are down to 1 demo left, okay, for this session. So let's go back to our client, and I want to talk about this for a minute. So I've spent a lot of time showing you these various scenarios, and you've seen a lot of activity over here as we were installing things. It would say downloading and installing and removing and all the different statuses that we have, okay? So one thing, just to point this out, I've kept mentioning that whenever we do a deployment, applications 100% universally, applications this applies, and even for the vast majority of packages, legacy packages, we're going to run these things from the local client cache. So I showed you early on where the client cache was located, but let's go actually look at it here. So here is the client cache folder, and all of this is the various content that was downloaded for the deployments that I was, or for the applications that I was deploying in demo form. Okay, so let's see what happens when I delete one of these. Okay, I'll just delete a few of them. Okay, and this is actually a very real scenario. Not that you would go in here and hopefully routinely you wouldn't go in here and remove content from the cache. In fact, I can't really think of a reason why you would come in here and remove content from the cache. But if that happens, and where it could happen in an automated way, again, your cache by default is 5 gigs. If you don't have any space issues and there's plenty of room in the cache, then you'll see content in here that's very old, very likely, as you run through the life of Configuration Manager 2012. But if your cache is running low on space, then there will be times where we will purge out older data and make room for new data. So if that happens and you later want to rerun a deployment that you had out there previously, but now the content is deleted, we'll have to download it again. Okay, so I just simulated that by deleting the files in the cache. That scenario where the cache was cleaned up, we need to download the content again and install an application. So I'll just go ahead and install dependency main again. All right, so let me draw this down a little bit. Now, what you will expect to happen the very first time is that this will run and it will fail. So let's go ahead and get that out of the way because we need to move past it. So I'll install that. It's going to go and it's going to try to install and it's going to fail. And the reason it's going to fail is because it's looking in the cache and it doesn't see the stuff that it needs in there, and so it can't run the deployment, and so we're done. Okay? But if I run it again, then we'll basically have a clean slate, and now we'll know that we need to go get that content. And here what you should see is a little bit of back and forth on the status. You might see it go to failed again, but then you'll see it go over to downloading and different things. You'll see some folders show up here where we're actually downloading the content into the cache. Here we go, downloading. We have a temporary folder, so we got it down there. Okay, and you see it installing, and off we go. Okay, back to installed. So again, just a demonstration to show you kind of how the cache works. We will download stuff again that we need to download, even if it goes missing, and so on. So that covers that. So that really wraps out what I wanted to show you in this session. So this again is part one of what will be 2 parts of discussion on clients. So in the next session, just to give you a preview ahead, we'll spend some time talking about maintenance windows, both server side and client side, and the impact of setting those. We'll also talk about the impact of scenarios where you might have content that you've deployed, so an application that you're deploying, but you don't know what all users will want to use it. So let's paint the scenario specifically. You have content that you're going to deploy, but it's optional or available, to use the 2012 terms. So you don't necessarily want to deploy this content to every single one of your distribution points because you just don't know who's going to use it. But you do want to allow the users universal access to it if necessary, and to stage the content to the required distribution points on demand when the user asks for it. That's another scenario to show you how distribute on demand, as it's called, works in that kind of scenario. And then the third scenario for part 2 is where we'll spend the bulk of our time, and that's roaming. I have in the environment now 2 primary sites, and I'll show you what it's like when the client is assigned to one but roams into the boundaries of another, or maybe roams into the boundaries of a secondary site, or roams out of the boundaries altogether. All right, so that will be part 2 for our client discussion, and we'll continue the discussion during that session.